Blood. It slowly spread across the ground, soaking into the dusty soil and turning it into dark red mud. A giant lion, once proud and powerful, now lay pinned down by the cruel metal jaws of a trap. His strong paw was mangled and crushed by the poacher's device. Every breath came with great effort, turning into a quiet groan. The trap had likely been set several days earlier. The wound had started to rot, and flies circled above it, drawn by the smell of blood and decaying flesh. The darkness of the jungle slowly faded with the coming dawn. The first rays of sunlight broke through the thick canopy, creating strange patterns on the ground. A morning mist hung over the valley, a white veil hiding the secrets of the forest. Something moved in that haze, a massive shape, large, threatening. It came closer and closer to the injured lion. The sound of its steps was barely audible. The creature moved with the caution of a skilled hunter who knew how to blend in with the wild. If the lion could move, he would have already tried to run or prepare for a fight. But all he could do was watch the unknown figure coming toward him. Maybe this was the end. His instinct to survive told him to resist, but the pain and loss of blood had taken away his last strength. The fog parted, and the lion saw a huge silverback gorilla walking straight toward him. Its powerful hands touched the ground with every step, and its dark, almost human eyes never left the wounded predator. The gorilla's back was covered in silver fur, a sign of age and many battles for leadership. Scars marked its body, signs of a long and harsh life in the jungle. But there was no fear or rage in those eyes. Something else, something the lion couldn't understand, but that made him freeze instinctively. Maybe even something like recognition, though normally these two animals would never come so close unless it was a deadly fight. That was how the day began. A day that would change everything in this nature reserve and leave scientists in shock at what they were about to witness. The Emerald Valley Reserve in Kenya was one of the last safe places for many endangered wild animals. Here, among lush greenery and tall mountains, an international team of scientists and wildlife protectors worked to preserve the unique ecosystem of the region. Founded nearly 30 years ago with donations from global environmental organizations, the reserve stood against rising threats like poaching, deforestation, and climate change. Jason Crawford, the chief ranger of the reserve, had worked in this field for over 20 years. Tall, tanned, with sun-bleached hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, he knew every corner of the reserve like the back of his hand. He was respected not only by his colleagues but also by the local villagers, who saw him not just as a scientist, but as someone truly devoted to Africa's wildlife. That morning, Jason was doing his usual patrol. It was part of his daily routine, checking the boundaries of the reserve, looking for signs of poachers, and observing the condition of the animals. But something felt off today. The jungle was too quiet. A heavy rain had fallen during the night, and the ground was still wet, which made it easier to spot fresh tracks. Water dripped from the leaves at the slightest breeze, making it feel like the rain hadn't stopped. The unnatural silence made him uneasy. The usual morning sounds, monkeys chattering, birds calling, leaves rustling, were gone, replaced by a heavy stillness. This kind of silence often came before danger, a storm or a predator nearby. Jason checked his weapon. He always carried a tranquilizer gun in case he encountered an aggressive animal. Then he moved slowly toward the southern edge of the reserve, where the forest opened into more open ground. This was the area where poachers were most often caught trying to get in, drawn by the rare species living in the reserve. Suddenly, the radio on his belt came to life. Amara, the reserve's new veterinarian, warned of signs of poachers near the southeastern section. Jason picked up his pace. Now he understood the reason for the strange silence. The animals had sensed the intruders and gone into hiding. A few minutes later, he reached a small clearing and stopped. Ahead, at the edge of the field, he saw something moving. At first, Jason thought it was one of the gorillas from Atlas's group, the famous silverback male who had lived in the area for over 10 years. Atlas was a legend in the reserve. Smart and calm, he was the true leader of his group. Jason had studied his behavior for years and had even published several papers about the social structure of the gorilla group. But what Jason saw made him freeze in shock. It really was Atlas. But next to him was a large lion whose paw was caught in a steel trap. Blood had spread across the ground, and it was clear the lion was in great pain. The trap was an old design, the kind banned long ago by international wildlife agreements for being too cruel, but poachers still use them. The most surprising thing wasn't that. Atlas wasn't running from the predator like any normal gorilla would. He was standing next to the lion, watching him with an expression that Jason could only describe as concern. Even more, the gorilla kept looking around from time to time, as if searching for someone who could help. "Impossible," Jason whispered, but his eyes weren't lying. The gorilla was moving slowly around the injured lion, showing no signs of fear or aggression. Sometimes Atlas would stop and examine the trap closely, as if trying to understand how it worked. Once he even gently reached out a hand to touch the metal device, but quickly pulled back when the lion let out a painful growl. Jason carefully pulled out his binoculars and adjusted the focus. Now he could see the lion more clearly. It was a stunning male, with a thick, dark mane and a strong, muscular body. But the most noticeable feature was a long scar running across his right eye, likely from a past run-in with poachers, or maybe a fight with another lion. Based on his size and condition, the lion was still relatively young, probably only recently reaching maturity and leaving his pride. Suddenly, Atlas turned and looked straight at Jason. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jason felt like he saw a plea for help in the gorilla's gaze. Then Atlas made a low, almost inaudible sound and turned back to the lion. It wasn't a typical gorilla sound. Jason had never heard anything quite like it before. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It seemed like the gorilla was asking him to help. At that moment, 1,000 questions rushed through Jason's mind. How had Atlas and the lion ended up together? Why wasn't the gorilla afraid of the predator? And most of all, why did he seem to be trying to help him? Wasting no time, Jason called the base and requested the medical team. As the ranger waited for backup, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that he had just witnessed something incredible. Something that didn't fit the usual laws of wild animal behavior. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but something told Jason that this was part of a much bigger story. 15 minutes later, Amara arrived with a group of rangers. When they saw the scene in front of them, everyone froze in disbelief. A gorilla and a lion, two natural enemies, were lying near each other in some kind of silent truce. The rangers, many of whom had spent decades in the wild, looked at each other in confusion. Some even rubbed their eyes, thinking they were seeing things. Atlas backed away a little when he saw the people, but didn't leave. He stayed nearby, closely watching everything. His posture wasn't threatening, just cautious, and more surprisingly, full of expectation. The team quickly got to work. Amara injected the lion with a tranquilizer, while the rangers prepared tools to remove the trap. It was a difficult and delicate job. The metal had sunk deep into the flesh, and any wrong move could cause more damage. The wound was already infected, and Amara quietly cursed the poachers who had left such a cruel device behind. All this time, Atlas remained in place, never taking his eyes off the scene. His behavior showed understanding, almost a human awareness of the situation. Each time the lion let out a weak growl of pain, the gorilla made a soft sound, as if trying to calm him. It was so unusual that even the experienced rangers kept glancing up, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Finally, after several long and painful minutes, the trap gave way. The metal jaws opened, freeing the lion's injured paw. Amara immediately cleaned the wound, applied antibiotics, and wrapped it with bandages. The injury was deep. Tendons and possibly even bone were affected, but with proper care, the lion was expected to make a full recovery. The lion needed to be transported to the reserve's medical center for further treatment. The team carefully lifted the immobilized animal onto a special stretcher and began carrying him toward the jeep. Moving such a large predator was a challenging task, requiring full coordination from everyone. And then something happened that left everyone in complete shock. Atlas suddenly stood up, let out a loud sound, and quickly walked toward the team. The rangers froze, ready to defend themselves, but the gorilla didn't show any aggression. He simply walked next to the stretcher as if he was escorting the lion. There was no threat in his movements, only purpose and something that could only be called care, if it were a human. "Don't stop him," Jason said quietly. I think he just wants to make sure the lion is going to be okay. The rangers looked at each other, but followed his lead. They continued walking toward the jeep, allowing Atlas to walk beside them. It was a clear violation of protocol. Normally, contact with wild animals, especially primates, was kept to a minimum. But the situation was so unusual that Jason decided to trust his instincts. Atlas followed the team all the way to the jeep. Then, as the lion was loaded into the vehicle, he stood next to it and placed his large hand on the edge of the truck bed, as if saying goodbye to a friend. There was something so human in that gesture that several rangers gasped out loud. One of them even took out his phone and snapped a picture. An automatic reaction when someone sees something unbelievable. On the way to the medical center, Jason shared a sudden memory with Amara. 7 years earlier, during a major raid on an illegal wildlife trafficking operation, 2 young animals were rescued: a baby gorilla who would later become Atlas, and a lion cub with a distinctive mark above his right eye, which later became a scar. The raid had been dangerous. Poachers fought back with weapons, and several rangers were injured. But it was worth it. Dozens of rare animals were saved, including those 2. At the rehab center, the cubs were kept in cages next to each other before being released into the wild. They used to play through the bars despite being from different species. At the time, it just seemed like a sweet coincidence. But now it all made a new kind of sense. Maybe that childhood bond left such a deep memory that even after years in the wild, they could still recognize each other. "You think that's really possible?" Amara asked, looking at Jason doubtfully. "Can animals remember something like that after so many years?" "I don't know," Jason replied honestly. "But what we saw today doesn't fit with normal wild animal behavior. Something connects Atlas and that lion, and I plan to find out what it is." The lion, now named Scar because of the distinctive scar on his face, was placed in a large enclosure at the reserve's medical center. His injury was serious, but not fatal, and with proper care, he was expected to recover fully. Amara spent several hours cleaning and treating the wound, then applied a special bandage to protect the damaged tissue. She also took blood and tissue samples. It was important to make sure no serious infection had developed. What amazed everyone was Atlas's behavior. Every morning, the giant silverback would appear near the perimeter fence and sit there for hours, looking toward the medical center. He never tried to get inside, never showed aggression. He just watched as if waiting for news about his friend. Sometimes he brought fruit and left it by the fence, a gesture that would seem touching if it came from a human. "I've never seen this kind of cross-species empathy," Amara admitted while watching the gorilla through binoculars. "This goes against everything we know about wild animal behavior." She had spent most of her career studying animals in their natural habitats, but nothing in her experience matched what she was seeing now. Jason started keeping a detailed observation journal. He recorded every visit from Atlas, his behavior, and how Scar responded to the gorilla's presence. It was a rare chance to study something that went beyond traditional zoology, and Jason wasn't going to miss it. Meanwhile, the Emerald Valley Reserve was going through hard times. Richard Walters, the director of the reserve, informed Jason and Amara that funding was being cut. If no new sponsors could be found in the next 2 months, they would have to shut down some animal protection programs and lay off part of the staff. "We've already reduced expenses to the minimum," Richard said, running a hand through his graying hair. "But the current budget isn't enough to keep all our programs running. If nothing changes, we'll have to cancel the reintroduction projects and focus only on protecting existing territory." The situation became even more difficult as poachers grew more active. Their tracks were showing up all around the edges of the reserve, and it was clear they knew about Scar. They were possibly planning to capture him. A trophy lion with such a unique look could bring in huge money on the black market. The local police had neither the resources nor the will to fight these well-organized poaching gangs, leaving the protection of animals to the small group of rangers at the reserve. Amara suggested trying to get global attention for the unusual friendship between the gorilla and the lion. If the story was told the right way, it might attract new sponsors and help protect the reserve from shutting down. Jason had doubts. He didn't want to turn Scar and Atlas into some kind of circus attraction, but in the end he agreed, realizing this might be their only chance to save not just the reserve, but many of the animals living there. On the 5th day after Scar's rescue, Jason decided to run an experiment. With Amara's permission, the lion was moved to an outdoor recovery enclosure closer to the edge of the reserve, near the spot where Atlas usually appeared. The enclosure was specially designed for predators recovering from injuries. It was large, had shelter from sun and rain, a water source, and a raised platform for observation. The reaction didn't take long. Within an hour of Scar's relocation, the powerful figure of Atlas appeared on a nearby hilltop. The gorilla stood up on his hind legs and sniffed the air. Then he made a series of specific sounds. Not aggressive, but more like a call. It wasn't normal gorilla vocalization. It was something special, maybe even unique to this moment. Scar, who had been resting under the shelter, lifted his head and listened. Then, with visible effort, he got up and limped toward the side of the enclosure closest to Atlas. His movements were slow and cautious. The wound still hurt, but the need to get closer to the gorilla seemed stronger than the pain. The two animals looked at each other across the distance. The lion let out a low growl. Not a threat, more like a greeting. Atlas responded with a deep, muffled sound. There was something almost ritualistic in this exchange, as if they had their own way of saying hello. "They're communicating," Amara whispered in amazement. "This is incredible." She quickly took notes in her notebook. This kind of wild animal behavior deserved close study. In the days that followed, the scene repeated with small variations. Atlas came every morning and spent several hours sitting on the hill across from Scar's enclosure. Sometimes they exchanged sounds, sometimes they just quietly watched each other. Their interaction looked like the kind of silent understanding between old friends who didn't need words. One morning, Jason found something strange at the edge of Scar's enclosure, a small pile of fresh fruit and leaves that clearly hadn't been left by staff. That could mean only one thing. Atlas had somehow managed to toss food over the fence for his injured friend. Considering the height of the fence, it took not only strength, but the kind of precision only a few primates are capable of. "The gorilla's feeding him," Jason said, showing Amara the discovery. "This isn't just empathy or curiosity. Atlas truly cares about him." Amara nodded, still struggling to believe her own eyes. "We need to document this, every detail. This could completely change what we know about gorilla behavior." With permission from Richard, several cameras were installed to record every interaction between the gorilla and the lion. The footage was astonishing. Two natural enemies, showing not aggression, but care for one another. Each day brought new surprises. Atlas wasn't just bringing food. He seemed to be choosing plants with healing properties, the same kinds used by local tribes to treat wounds. When the first video clips hit the internet, they caused a worldwide sensation. News agencies from around the globe reached out to the reserve asking for interviews. Zoologists and primatologists requested access to the observation data. The story of Scar and Atlas became a viral phenomenon, collecting tens of millions of views and thousands of comments. Gorilla saves lion, an unbelievable wild friendship, cross-species bond that will change how you see animals. Lion and gorilla prove that compassion has no limits. Headlines like these flooded newspapers and websites. Journalists competed to interview Jason and Amara. Some even offered money for exclusive footage of the animals' interaction. With fame came financial support. Donations began arriving from individuals and organizations. Several major conservation foundations expressed interest in long-term partnerships with the Emerald Valley Reserve. Even local government officials, who had previously shown little interest in the reserve, suddenly realized that wildlife protection was an important cause worthy of public support. But not everything was going smoothly. The increased attention to the reserve attracted not only well-wishers. Jason started noticing strange things. Tracks of unknown vehicles near the perimeter, suspicious people trying to photograph the area using drones. The poachers were clearly getting more active, and Scar was their main target. To them, he wasn't a symbol of interspecies friendship. He was just a valuable prize that could be sold for a high price on the black market. "We need to tighten security," Jason insisted during a meeting with Richard. "The poachers will get more aggressive once they realize how valuable Scar has become because of this story." Richard ordered more patrols and warned the staff to stay alert, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closer than they thought. He started personally checking the perimeter every night, often staying on watch until sunrise. His instincts weren't wrong. Several times, rangers found cut sections of the fence and signs of intrusion, but the trespassers were never caught. Scar's recovery was going better than expected. 3 weeks after being rescued, he could already walk with almost no limp, though the wound still required daily care. Amar was impressed by how quickly he was healing and believed it was not just the medical treatment, but also the emotional comfort he got from seeing Atlas regularly. Animals, like people, heal faster when they feel safe and don't experience stress, she explained to Jason, showing him pictures of the healing wound. And Scar seems to feel exactly that way in Atlas's presence. Then the question came up, what to do next? Keeping the lion in captivity forever would be cruel, but releasing him into the wild where he could once again fall prey to poachers was just as risky. And there was another issue, Atlas. Their bond was obvious, and separating them felt wrong. Jason spent hours analyzing video footage of their interactions, trying to understand the nature of their connection. He noticed that over time, their communication became more complex. It seemed like the two animals had developed their own language of sounds and gestures that only they could understand. This went beyond everything science had assumed about animal intelligence. After long discussions, a decision was made to create a special buffer zone on the edge of the reserve, where lions and gorillas both naturally lived. It was a compromise, a way to return the animals to their habitat while allowing them to maintain contact. The zone would be large enough to provide a natural environment for both species, but also secured against outside threats. This is an unprecedented experiment, Richard explained at a press conference. But the story of Scar and Atlas has already proven that our understanding of wild animals needs to change. We hope this project won't just preserve their unique friendship, but also help us better understand the emotional and cognitive abilities of these amazing creatures. But fate had other plans. On the night before Scar was scheduled to be released into the buffer zone, the reserve's security system detected a breach in the perimeter. Jason, who was on duty in the control room, immediately raised the alarm. The monitors showed 3 figures in camouflage climbing over the fence and quickly moving toward the medical center. Poachers had broken into the reserve and were heading straight for Scar's enclosure. Jason raced out, knowing that even with the fastest response, the patrol wouldn't arrive for at least 10 minutes. He grabbed his radio to call for backup as he jumped into his Jeep. The road to the enclosure felt endless. In Jason's mind, worst-case scenarios flashed by one after another. If the poachers killed Scar or took him to the black market, it wouldn't just be the loss of a rare animal. It would destroy a bond never before seen in the wild. When Jason reached Scar's enclosure, his worst fears were confirmed. 2 men in camouflage with rifles were already breaking the lock on the gate. A third was standing next to a Jeep, clearly preparing for a quick escape. Their plan was simple and brutal. Kill the lion, cut off his head with the scar for a trophy, and maybe take other body parts to sell for black market traditional medicine. Jason stopped the Jeep and turned off the headlights so he wouldn't draw attention. Then he quietly got out, holding his tranquilizer gun ready. He knew that he stood little chance against 3 armed men, but he couldn't let them take Scar. Through gaps in the fence, the ranger could see the lion watching the scene closely. The animal sensed danger and was preparing to defend itself. Suddenly, the silence of the night was shattered by a deafening roar. But it wasn't Scar. The sound came from the jungle beyond the perimeter. It was so loud and powerful that even the poachers froze in place. It was the battle cry of a gorilla, a sound that could paralyze even the most experienced hunters. And then something incredible happened. Out of the forest darkness came the massive figure of Atlas. But he wasn't alone. 3 more gorillas from his group followed behind, all large silverbacks. They moved with surprising speed and grace for such massive creatures, breaking branches and undergrowth as they charged forward. The poachers panicked and grabbed their guns. One of them fired a shot into the air, trying to scare the gorillas off. But Atlas didn't stop. Letting out another roar, he rushed ahead, and the others followed him. They moved like a single unit, coordinating with the precision of a well-organized team. Jason took advantage of the confusion to get closer. He fired his tranquilizer at the nearest poacher, hitting him in the shoulder. The man staggered and collapsed. The other 2, seeing the gorillas approaching fast, panicked and ran toward their Jeep. One managed to jump in and start the engine. The second was just behind him. But Atlas caught up with him in a single leap. The image of the gorilla and the man silhouetted against the night sky looked almost mythological. A small, fragile human facing an ancient, primal force. But Atlas didn't kill him. He grabbed the man by his clothes and threw him aside with such force that the poacher flew across the clearing and crashed into the bushes. It was not an act of cruelty. It was a show of strength. Atlas could have easily killed the man, but instead he simply neutralized the threat. The jeep carrying the last poacher tried to speed away, but didn't get far. Patrol units had just arrived and blocked the road. In the glare of headlights, it was clear the Rangers had their weapons ready and were surrounding the vehicle, forcing the driver to surrender. Once it was over and the poachers were caught, Jason walked up to Scar's enclosure. The lion stood at the bars, watching everything carefully. His eyes were fixed on Atlas, who was now sitting nearby, almost as if guarding the pen. There was a silent exchange between them, a kind of dialogue Jason could only guess at. "He knew," said Amara quietly as she joined him. Somehow, Atlas knew Scar was in danger. She looked shaken, just like everyone else who had witnessed that night's events. During the interrogation, the captured poachers confessed they were hired by a collector from China who was ready to pay a fortune for the trophy of the now famous lion. But the most shocking revelation was that someone from inside the reserve had leaked the location of Scar and details about the security system. The traitor turned out to be a young ranger who had only recently joined the team. Financial problems and debts had pushed him to make a terrible choice, one that could have had devastating consequences. After the incident, it became clear that Scar was still in danger from poachers, and releasing him into the open buffer zone was too risky. But keeping him locked in an enclosure forever was also cruel. It was a difficult dilemma with no simple answer. For several days after the attack, Atlas didn't leave Scar's side. He slept on the ground near the fence, and the other gorillas from his group came to visit him, bringing food and showing support for their leader. It was a strange sight, a group of gorillas forming a protective circle around a lion. Jason came to a bold decision. Watching Scar and Atlas interact through the bars, he proposed a radical experiment to release Scar directly into Atlas's territory. It was a groundbreaking idea that went against every standard protocol and scientific rule about animal behavior. "This is madness," said one zoologist during an emergency meeting. "A lion is a predator. Sooner or later, his instincts will take over, and he'll attack the gorillas. Or worse, their young." The idea caused shock and disbelief among most of the reserve staff. Lions are hunters, and releasing one into a gorilla group seemed insane. But Jason insisted that Scar and Atlas had a special bond, and the other gorillas seemed to accept it. He showed data from his observations, proving that even other members of Atlas's group had started showing interest in the lion, without fear or aggression. "We can change history," Jason insisted. "If this experiment works, it will completely change the way we see different animal species and their ability to understand one another." After long debates, a compromise was reached. They would create a large, semi-open enclosure that included part of Atlas's group's territory. Scar would be released there under close supervision, and if everything went well, the fences would be gradually removed. A detailed monitoring system and emergency protocols were developed in case something went wrong. The day Scar was released into the new enclosure was filled with emotion for the entire reserve team. Cameras were set up around the perimeter to capture every moment of this historic event. Scientists from leading universities around the world were watching the live feed, ready to record every detail of this unique experiment. Scar was transported in a special crate and placed at the entrance to the enclosure. Jason and Amara watched from a safe distance, ready to step in if needed. Amara had a tranquilizer syringe ready in case Scar showed aggression. Atlas was already there, sitting at the edge of the clearing, surrounded by several members of his group. The gorillas looked calm, as if the lion's presence was nothing unusual. The females with babies stayed slightly back, but showed no signs of fear. When the cage door opened, Scar didn't rush out. He sniffed the air cautiously, trying to understand this new environment. His movements were smooth and careful. The wound had almost healed, though the scar from the trap was still visible on his powerful paw. Then Atlas did something no one expected. He left his group and slowly walked across the clearing toward the cage. The other gorillas stayed where they were, watching their leader. Their body language showed no tension, only interest and a bit of curiosity. Atlas stopped next to the cage and made a soft, almost purring sound, and Scar responded. The lion stepped out of the crate, looking around warily, but there was no fear or aggression. His powerful body shimmered in the morning light, creating a majestic image. The two animals stared at each other for several long seconds. Then Scar slowly walked up to Atlas. The gorilla reached out a hand and gently touched the lion's mane. It wasn't a gesture of dominance. It was one of recognition, of friendship. The moment was so moving that even the most experienced rangers couldn't hold back their emotions. "Incredible," whispered a zoologist from Cambridge, standing next to Jason. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I never would have believed it." At first, the other gorillas watched with caution, but seeing their leader's calm behavior, they gradually relaxed. Some even came closer, curiously inspecting the newest member of their unusual family. One young female dared to reach out and touch Scar's tail, but quickly jumped back, causing a ripple of laughter among the observers. In the days that followed, the reserve team watched with awe. Scar fully integrated into Atlas's group. He slept beside the gorillas, hunted small animals for food, but never showed aggression toward the gorillas, and spent most of his time near Atlas. Their relationship was so peaceful and natural, it felt as if they had been together their whole lives. Amazingly, the gorilla babies didn't fear the lion at all. They saw him as some kind of living toy. They often climbed onto Scar's back while he lay down, tugged on his mane, and he patiently let them do it. Sometimes he even let them play with the tip of his tail, pretending not to notice. When the videos and photos of this unique coexistence were published, they caused a worldwide sensation, not just among scientists, but also among millions of ordinary people around the globe. TV crews from many countries came to film the story, and leading scientists flew in just to see this natural wonder with their own eyes. Articles in scientific journals, documentaries, books. The story of Scar and Atlas inspired countless projects focused on studying interspecies relationships. The Emerald Valley Reserve became famous worldwide. Donations poured in, and its future was secured for many years to come. But for Jason and Amara, the most important outcome wasn't the financial success, it was the scientific breakthrough. Their research on interspecies interaction opened a new chapter in understanding animal cognition. But the most meaningful result of this story was a new understanding of what wild animals are capable of. Scar and Atlas proved that compassion, friendship, and mutual help are not limited to humans. They exist in nature, crossing the boundaries of species and instinct. This case made many scientists rethink their beliefs about the emotional and social lives of animals. Jason often came to the edge of the clearing where the unusual group now lived and simply watched. Sometimes Atlas would notice him and raise a hand in a kind of greeting, and beside him, majestic and calm, lay Scar, a lion who had found his home among gorillas. They had created their own kind of community, one that didn't follow the usual rules of nature, but instead worked by laws only they seemed to understand. The story of Scar and Atlas showed that even in the wild, where survival of the fittest seems to rule, there is still room for something greater, a friendship that crosses all boundaries. This story stirred the scientific world and public opinion alike, changing how people viewed our fellow creatures on this planet. And it all began with that remarkable morning when a wounded lion caught in a poacher's trap met a gorilla who chose not to ignore his suffering. A gorilla who remembered the little lion cub from her own childhood and reached out to help someone who, by the laws of nature, should have been her enemy. This story reminded the world that sometimes the greatest lessons in compassion and kindness come from those we call wild. Beings we assume act only on instinct, and maybe in the ability to see a friend in someone different from ourselves lies a kind of wisdom that we all still need to learn.